The roar of the engines echoed through the cabin of Air Force One, slicing through the air at 35,000 feet. Inside, President Donald Trump sat comfortably in his plush seat, surrounded by his staff, the quiet hum of the plane a stark contrast to the storm brewing in his mind. As the plane flew over the East Coast, heading towards Washington, D.C., Trump's thoughts were far from the calm and routine flight. He had been holding back for hours, fuming about the day's events. And now, it was time for action. The world outside was unaware of what was about to unfold inside the most important aircraft in the sky. The President of the United States was about to make a demand no one could have anticipated. The intercom buzzed, and a voice from the cockpit answered, "Yes, Mr. President." Trump's voice was sharp, cutting through the static. "I need you to change the flight plan. We're not going to Washington. I want to head directly to Mar-a-Lago. Now." The tone was unwavering, a command that left no room for negotiation. But as the words left his mouth, the weight of his request seemed to hang in the air. This wasn't just a presidential preference. It was an order. Captain James Fuller, a seasoned pilot who had flown countless dignitaries, presidents and high-profile officials, took a deep breath. This was different. It wasn't just any command. It was one that carried the weight of authority, but also the potential for chaos. "Mr. President," Captain Fuller replied, his voice steady but cautious, "we're already committed to landing in Washington. Changing the flight path will take significant time and will create issues with air traffic control. I can't comply with that request." The words hit Trump like a slap to the face. The audacity of the pilot to question his authority in such a direct way was nothing short of insulting. He leaned forward, the sharp lines of his face growing more rigid. "You don't get it, do you?" Trump's voice was low, filled with simmering anger. "I'm the President of the United States. I give the orders, not you. Change course. Now." For a moment, there was nothing but silence on the line. Captain Fuller was caught in a bind. He had taken an oath to serve the President. Yes, but he also had a responsibility to the people aboard, to the safety of the flight, and to the rules that governed it. There was no room for compromise here, not without risking everything. "Sir," Fuller's voice came through again, firmer now. "I understand your position, but the flight plan is not something I can alter on a whim. We've filed with air traffic control. I cannot change our course without significant repercussions." The tension was unbearable, an invisible force pushing against the weight of the conversation. Trump's temper was rising, but there was something about the pilot's unflinching resolve that gave him pause. This wasn't just about flying a plane from one place to another. It was about power, control, and the confrontation of two men, each refusing to back down. "I've had enough of this," Trump muttered under his breath. "Get me someone who knows how to follow orders." The words were chilling. With every syllable, the stakes grew higher. For Captain Fuller, this was no longer just about a routine flight. It was about principle. His decision could have massive consequences, but he couldn't allow the power of the presidency to trample over the integrity of the job he had sworn to uphold. The silence in the cockpit was deafening. The tension between President Trump and Captain Fuller crackled through the intercom, and even the hum of the engines seemed to fade into the background. Trump was fuming, and Captain Fuller was unwavering. Both men from two different worlds stood at an impasse. Trump was used to getting his way. He had spent decades navigating the cutthroat world of business, where the one with the loudest voice, the most authority, always had the final say. But now, on this presidential aircraft, he was encountering something he had rarely faced. Resistance. "Captain," Trump's voice came through again, icy and cold. "I don't care about your rules or air traffic control. I want this plane turned around, and I want it done now." Captain Fuller clenched his jaw, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had been in the air long enough to know how to handle a crisis, but this was different. This wasn't a mechanical malfunction, a sudden weather change, or even a medical emergency. This was about power. The President of the United States had given an order, and the pilot was refusing to follow it. "You're asking me to make a decision that jeopardizes the safety of this flight, Mr. President," Fuller replied, his voice calm but firm. "I cannot, in good conscience, comply with your request." The words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment it seemed as though time had slowed. Trump's mind raced, his temper flaring as he realized that this wasn't going to be as easy as he thought. He had encountered plenty of people who disagreed with him, but he was the president. No one defied the president. "You're making a mistake, Captain," Trump said, his tone colder than before. "Do you know who I am? I'm the one who makes the decisions here, not you. You think your little rebellion is going to change anything? I'll make sure you're out of a job before you can blink." Fuller's resolve did not waver. He had heard threats before, and this one was no different. But what Trump didn't realize was that this wasn't about just keeping his job. It was about doing what was right, even when it meant standing up to someone who held the highest office in the land. "I'm doing my job, Mr. President," Fuller responded, his voice steady, the weight of his words carrying through the intercom. "And my responsibility is to the people on this plane, to the safety of every single person here. That includes you, sir." Trump's patience was wearing thin. The walls of his cabin felt as if they were closing in on him. He had expected the pilot to cave, to comply with his demand, as others had done throughout his career. But this man, this pilot, was different. "You're a damn fool," Trump muttered under his breath. "I'll have you removed. You'll never work again." But Captain Fuller knew that he had already made the right call. He had not been intimidated by the power of the office, or the man behind it. In that moment, he had proven that some things were more important than fear or reputation. He wasn't just flying a plane. He was standing up for integrity and the principle of doing what was right, no matter the cost. As the minutes ticked by, the silence grew heavier. Trump was trapped in his own fury, while Fuller remained steadfast. The plane, still on course for Washington, flew on, its path unchanged. But the battle between power and principle had only just begun, and as the minutes stretched into an uncomfortable stillness, both men knew this was far from over. The tension inside Air Force One remained unbearable as the plane cruised through the sky. President Trump sat stiffly in his seat, eyes narrowed, the flickering overhead lights reflecting his mood. He had never been defied like this. Never in his long career had anyone challenged his authority so openly. And yet here he was, faced with the one man who had refused to bow to his will. The silence was deafening. Trump's grip on the armrests tightened as he thought of all the ways he could make this pilot pay for his defiance. He was the president. His word was law, or at least it should be. But Captain Fuller had ignored that, standing his ground as if nothing could shake his resolve. "Change course now," Trump said again, though his voice was weaker this time, tinged with frustration. There was no response. The air inside the cabin felt cold, like the very authority Trump once commanded. He could hear the anger in the president's voice, but he knew what he had to do. The safety of the flight and the people aboard was his responsibility, not to mention the integrity of the entire operation. He couldn't let the power of the presidency override that. "I'm not changing the flight plan, Mr. President. I can't." Those words were final. They cut through the tense air like a knife, leaving Trump speechless for a brief moment. The reality of the situation began to settle in. For the first time, he realized he might actually lose this battle. It wasn't about the plane's destination anymore. It was about respect, authority, and the limits of control. Minutes passed, stretching into an uncomfortable stillness. For the first time in years, Trump was forced to confront the fact that not everyone was willing to comply with his commands, no matter how forceful they were. The weight of his own words hung heavily in the air. As the plane descended toward Washington, D.C., Trump's mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. He had never been in a position like this. Never had anyone stood so firmly in his way. But something within him had also shifted. The pilot's resolve, his unyielding commitment to doing what was right, had struck a chord. When the plane finally landed, Trump was the first to exit, his face tense with frustration, but also with a hint of something else, reluctance perhaps, to admit that he had just been humbled. He stormed off the plane, but inside something had changed. Captain Fuller stood tall in the cockpit, his resolve stronger than ever. He had done what he knew was right, regardless of the consequences. Whether his career would survive this standoff, he didn't know. But in that moment, he had proven something far greater, that true power wasn't about control. It was about doing what was just, no matter who stood in your way. As the plane taxied to a stop, the final lesson was clear. Sometimes, true strength comes not from being the loudest, but from standing firm in the face of overwhelming pressure, even when it costs you everything.